What happens when a beloved British acting legend sits down for what should be a friendly chat, only to face an ambush of personal attacks and professional disrespect? In just 37 seconds, one inflammatory comment would transform a routine morning show appearance into television history, exposing the toxic entitlement lurking beneath the surface of daytime TV. Michael Caine settled into the bright orange sofa of the Loose Women's studio, his weathered hands folded calmly in his lap. The veteran actor had agreed to this interview to promote his latest memoir, expecting the usual light-hearted banter about his incredible career spanning over 6 decades. What he got instead was something entirely different, a slow, burning confrontation that would stretch over the next 20 minutes, escalating from subtle digs to outright warfare, all captured live on air. Denise Welch leaned forward in her chair, her eyes gleaming with the kind of predatory intensity that made seasoned publicists nervous. She had clearly done her homework, but not the kind that celebrates a guest's achievements. No, this was the homework of someone looking for blood in the water. "Michael, lovely to have you here," Denise began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Now I have to ask about something that's been bothering me personally. In your book, you mentioned that you think modern actors are too soft, too pampered. Are you saying that people like me who work in television don't work as hard as you did back in your day?" Michael's eyebrows raised slightly. This wasn't the question he'd expected, and certainly not delivered with such barely concealed hostility. He shifted in his seat, maintaining his characteristic composure. "Well, Denise, I wouldn't say that exactly," Michael replied, his voice measured and diplomatic. "What I meant was that the industry has changed. When I started out, we didn't have the same safety nets, the same support systems. We had to learn on the job, sink or swim. I'm not criticizing anyone personally." Denise wasn't satisfied with diplomacy. She leaned back, crossing her arms with a smug smile that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment all morning. "Oh, but you are though, aren't you? You're sitting there in your expensive suit, talking about how tough you had it, while people like us are out here every day, working just as hard, dealing with just as much pressure. And frankly, Michael, some of us didn't have the luxury of being handed opportunities on a silver platter because we fit a certain look." The studio fell silent. Even the camera operator seemed to sense that something had shifted. Michael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. "I'm sorry, but I think you've misunderstood what I was saying entirely, and I have to say, I find your tone rather unnecessary." Denise let out a harsh laugh that echoed through the studio like a challenge. "Unnecessary? What's unnecessary is you coming on here and lecturing us about work ethic when you've spent the last 50 years playing the same Cockney character in different costumes. At least I have range." The other panelists exchanged uncomfortable glances. This had gone from an interview to something much uglier, much more personal. Michael's hands remained folded, but there was a new tension in his shoulders, a coiled energy that suggested decades of professional restraint were being tested. "I think there's been some confusion here," Michael said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of controlled anger. "I came here to talk about my book, my experiences, not to be attacked for sharing honest observations about an industry I've been part of longer than you've been alive." "There it is," Denise pounced, pointing at him triumphantly. "The age card, the old man putting the younger generation in their place. How original, Michael, how absolutely groundbreaking." The camera captured every micro-expression on Michael's face as he processed this escalation. Here was a man who had worked with the greatest directors of multiple generations, who had earned respect through decades of professionalism, being treated like a doddering has-been by someone who seemed to view his presence as a personal affront. "I haven't played any cards, Denise. I've simply tried to answer your questions honestly, despite the fact that they seem designed more to provoke than to inform your viewers." "Provoke?" Denise's voice rose, her professional veneer cracking slightly. "You know what provokes me, Michael? Entitled old men who think their past achievements give them the right to dismiss everyone else's struggles. You want to talk about work ethic? I'm here 5 days a week dealing with real issues, real people, while you swan around collecting lifetime achievement awards for basically being yourself on screen. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael Caine, the man who had faced down directors, producers, and critics for over half a century, sat perfectly still for a moment that felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, but carried an unmistakable edge of finality. I think we're done here. But Denise wasn't finished. She had drawn blood and could smell weakness, or what she mistook for weakness in a man who was simply choosing restraint over retaliation. Oh, we're done when I say we're done, Michael. This is my show, my domain. You don't get to walk away just because someone finally called you out on your outdated attitudes and overinflated sense of importance. Michael's head turned slowly toward her, and for the first time in the interview, viewers could see the full force of his displeasure. This wasn't the twinkle-eyed charmer from the movies. This was a man who had earned every ounce of his reputation through dedication, talent, and decades of professionalism. And he was not going to sit there and be diminished by someone who seemed to mistake rudeness for journalism. Called me out, Michael repeated, his voice remaining level, but there was steel beneath the silk now. Is that what you think you're doing? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've used this interview as an opportunity to work through some personal issues that have absolutely nothing to do with me or my book. The truth of his words hung in the air like an accusation. Every person in that studio knew he was right, but Denise was too far down the path of confrontation to back down. Now, personal issues. The only personal issue I have, Michael, is with people who think their celebrity gives them the right to look down on everyone else. You come in here with your superior attitude, your condescending tone, acting like you're doing us some great favor by gracing us with your presence. Michael's composure, legendary throughout Hollywood for remaining unshakable under pressure, was being systematically dismantled by a host who seemed determined to turn a book promotion into a public execution. The veteran actor leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a tone that colleagues from his early Alfie days would have recognized as dangerous. Superior attitude, condescending tone. Michael repeated, each word measured with surgical precision. Denise, I've been nothing but polite since I sat down. You're the one who started this interview with accusations and personal attacks. You're the one who's been twisting my words and putting meanings into them that simply aren't there. Denise laughed again, but this time it sounded forced, almost manic. She was clearly enjoying the conflict, feeding off the tension she'd created. Oh, please, Michael, don't play the victim now. You wrote the book. You made the comments. Own them. Stop pretending like you're some innocent party here. I am owning them, Michael replied, his patience wearing visibly thin. What I won't do is sit here and let you rewrite what I actually said to fit whatever narrative you've decided to construct. My observations about the industry were meant to be thoughtful, not divisive. But Denise was on a roll now. Emboldened by what she perceived as having the upper hand, she turned to the camera with a theatrical gesture, as if appealing to the audience at home. Ladies, are we really supposed to believe that this man, who's made a career out of playing working class heroes while living in luxury, understands anything about real struggle? The attack was so brazen, so deliberately inflammatory, that even the production staff behind the cameras could be seen shifting uncomfortably. Michael's face remained impassive, but his knuckles had gone white where his hands gripped the arm of the sofa. I've never claimed to understand everyone's struggle, Michael said quietly. But I do understand mine. I grew up in Rotherhithe, left school at 15, worked in factories before I ever set foot on a film set. I've earned everything I have, and I won't apologize for that success to you or anyone else. Earned it. Denise's voice dripped with sarcasm. Or were you just in the right place at the right time with the right accent? Because let's be honest, Michael, if you were starting out today with your background, your look, your attitude, would you even get past the first audition? The question hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. It was a direct attack not just on Michael's achievements, but on his very identity as an actor. Every person watching could sense that a line had been crossed, that this had moved beyond professional disagreement into something much more personal and cruel. Michael was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on Denise with an intensity that made her shift slightly in her chair despite her bravado. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "You know what, Denise? I've been in this business for over 60 years. I've worked with directors who could destroy careers with a word, producers who could make or break dreams on a whim. I faced critics who made their living tearing down everything I tried to build. But in all that time, in all those encounters, I've never met anyone quite so determined to diminish another person's life work while they're sitting right in front of them." For the first time since the interview began, Denise seemed momentarily taken aback, but her recovery was swift and her counterattack was vicious. "Life work, is that what we're calling it now? Michael, you've made the same film 40 times with different titles. You play Michael Caine in every single role. Don't dress it up as some grand artistic achievement." The insult was so reductive, so dismissive of decades of craft and evolution, that it left the studio in stunned silence. Michael's jaw worked silently for a moment, as if he were physically restraining words that wanted to escape. "That's your professional opinion, is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's everyone's professional opinion." Denise shot back, clearly feeling she'd landed a decisive blow. "We just don't usually say it to your face because we're too polite. But since you want to talk about honesty and work ethic, let's be honest. You've been coasting on charm and that accent for decades." As the clock ticked past the 5-minute mark, Michael paused, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He glanced at the other panelists, who were now murmuring awkwardly, trying to interject but being waved off by Denise. "Let's talk about range, then, since you brought it up," Michael said, his tone shifting to one of measured reflection. "In my career, I've played everything from Shakespearean roles in theater to action heroes in blockbusters, from dramatic leads in films like The Cider House Rules to comedic turns in movies like Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. I've adapted, evolved, and learned from every project. What about you, Denise? Your work on this show is admirable, but is attacking guests the full extent of your range." Denise's eyes narrowed, and she fired back quickly. "Oh, now you're turning it around. Typical deflection. This isn't about me. It's about your outdated views on the industry. You criticize modern actors for being pampered, but ignore how the world has changed. Mental health support, diversity initiatives, things that make the business better for everyone." Michael nodded thoughtfully, refusing to rise to the bait immediately. "I agree the industry has improved in many ways, and I'm grateful for that. But my point in the book was about resilience, about how we built it through trial and error. It's not a criticism, it's an observation from experience." The exchange continued like this for several minutes, with Denise circling back to her initial accusations, probing deeper into Michael's memoir quotes, and twisting them to fit her narrative. At around the 8-minute mark, she pulled out a highlighted page from his book, reading aloud, "Today's performers expect everything handed to them, trailers, assistants, therapy on set. Sounds pretty judgmental to me, Michael. Are you saying we don't deserve those things?" "I'm saying they weren't there for us, so we adapted." Michael responded evenly. "It's not about deserving, it's about perspective. I've seen young actors thrive with those supports, and that's wonderful. But dismissing my experiences as old-fashioned ignores the foundation we laid." The other panelists finally jumped in tentatively, one asking Michael about his favorite roles to lighten the mood. But Denise steered it back. "Let's not change the subject. Michael, you also wrote about how social media has ruined authenticity in acting. Is that code for saying people like me, who built careers in TV and online, aren't real artists?" Michael sighed, the weariness showing for the first time. "Social media is a tool, Denise. It can amplify voices, but it can also create pressure to perform constantly, not just on screen. Again, not a criticism, just an observation from someone who's seen the industry pre- and post-internet." As the segment dragged into the 12-minute mark, the tension built layer by layer. Denise peppered him with questions about specific films, implying his successes were luck rather than talent. The Italian Job was a hit because of the era, not your performance, admit it. Michael countered with anecdotes from set, sharing stories of long hours and improvisations that shaped his craft, but each response was met with skepticism or interruption. By the 15-minute point, the audience was murmuring, and social media was likely exploding online, though neither knew it yet. Denise, sensing the energy shift, went for the jugular again. "Tell me, Michael, how does it feel to know that your best work is behind you, that you're basically a living museum piece now?" The cruelty of the comment was breathtaking. Here was a woman systematically attacking not just a guest's professional achievements, but his very relevance, his worth as a human being. Michael's response was to smile, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who had finally seen enough. "You really can't help yourself, can you?" he said, shaking his head slowly. "This whole performance, this manufactured outrage, it's not about me at all, is it? It's about you. It's about your need to prove something, to make yourself feel bigger by making others feel smaller. Don't you dare psycho-analyze me," Denise snapped, her composure finally cracking completely. "I don't need to prove anything to anyone, especially not to some has-been actor who thinks his knighthood makes him untouchable." "Has-been," Michael repeated, his eyebrows raising in genuine surprise. "Is that really where you want to take this conversation, Denise? Because I have to tell you, for someone who makes a living talking to people, you seem remarkably bad at actually listening to what they're saying." The observation hit its mark. Denise's face contorted with fury, and when she spoke again, all pretense of professionalism had evaporated. "I listen just fine, Michael. What I hear is an old man who can't accept that his time is over, that nobody cares about his opinions anymore, that he's become irrelevant in an industry that's moved on without him." The words hit the studio like a physical blow. Michael Caine stood frozen for a moment, processing what had just been said to him on national television. Here was a man who had worked alongside Laurence Olivier, who had been directed by Christopher Nolan, who had earned the respect of generations of filmmakers, being told he was irrelevant by a daytime television host who seemed to mistake cruelty for courage. "Irrelevant?" Michael repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "You know, Denise, I've been called many things in my career. Critics have called my work everything from brilliant to mediocre, and I've accepted their right to their opinions, but what you're doing here isn't criticism, it's something else entirely." Denise leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, wearing an expression of smug satisfaction. She clearly believed she had won whatever game she thought they were playing. "What am I doing, Michael? Telling the truth, asking the hard questions that your usual interviewers are too starstruck to ask." "You're being needlessly cruel," Michael replied, his voice carrying decades of hard-earned wisdom. "And what's worse, you're being cruel while hiding behind the pretense of journalism. You've taken what should have been a conversation and turned it into an ambush, and I suspect your viewers can see exactly what you're doing." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Denise's face. She glanced quickly at the other panelists, who were staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to embarrassment. The studio audience, usually quick to react to any drama, sat in uncomfortable silence. "Ambush?" Denise forced another laugh, but it sounded hollow now. "Michael, you're on a talk show. We ask questions. We have discussions. If you can't handle that without getting defensive and throwing around accusations, maybe television isn't the right medium for you anymore." Michael shook his head slowly, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both disappointment and finality. "This isn't a discussion, Denise. This hasn't been a discussion from the moment I sat down. You came into this interview with an agenda, and that agenda seems to have been to humiliate a guest who agreed to appear on your show in good faith." Good faith. Denise's voice rose again, desperation creeping in around the edges. "You came here to sell your book, to promote yourself. Don't pretend this was some altruistic gesture. "Of course I came here to promote my book," Michael replied calmly. "That's what authors do. That's what guests do on shows like this. But I also came here expecting to be treated with basic human decency, and that's where we seem to have had a fundamental misunderstanding." The truth of his words was undeniable. Everyone in that studio, everyone watching at home, could see exactly what had happened. A respected actor had come to talk about his memoirs and found himself subjected to a systematic character assassination by a host who seemed to view his presence as a personal affront. Denise's face was now flushed with anger and something that looked suspiciously like panic. She had pushed too far, gone too deep into territory she couldn't navigate her way out of, and she knew it. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Decency? You want to talk about decency? What's decent about coming on here and looking down your nose at everyone? What's decent about acting like you're doing us some great favor by gracing us with your presence?" As the 18-minute mark approached, Michael's response was to do something completely unexpected. He smiled, but this time it was genuine, almost pitying. "Denise, I need you to listen to yourself right now. Really listen, because what you're saying, the way you're saying it, it's revealing far more about you than it is about me." The observation landed like a thunderbolt. Suddenly, it was crystal clear to everyone watching that Michael was right. Denise's attacks, her manufactured outrage, her desperate attempts to diminish him, they weren't about anything he had said or done. They were about her own insecurities, her own need to prove herself by destroying someone else. "Don't you dare turn this around on me," Denise snarled, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "I'm not the one with the problem here, aren't you?" Michael asked quietly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you invited me here specifically to tear me down, and I have to ask myself why. What is it about me, about my success, about my career that bothers you so much that you'd sacrifice your own professionalism just to take shots at me?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Denise opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time in the entire interview, she was speechless. Confronted with the ugly truth of her own behavior, she faltered. Michael looked around the studio one final time, his gaze taking in the uncomfortable faces of the other panelists, the mortified expressions of the crew, the stunned silence of the audience. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, dignified, and absolutely final. "I came here today to talk about my life, my work, my experiences. I thought I was going to have a conversation with professionals who understood the basic principles of courtesy and respect. Instead, I've been subjected to what can only be described as a sustained personal attack by someone who seems to think that being rude is the same thing as being interesting." He paused, letting his words sink in, then delivered what would become the most quoted line from the entire debacle. "I've worked with some difficult people in my time, Denise, but I've never encountered anyone who seems so determined to make themselves look small while trying to make others look smaller. I won't be part of this any longer." And with that, as the segment hit the 20-minute mark, Michael Caine stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. The action sent a ripple of tension through the studio. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every nuance of his expression as he looked down at Denise, who suddenly seemed much smaller in her chair. He turned and walked toward the studio exit. His movements were unhurried, dignified, the walk of a man who had maintained his integrity in the face of an unprovoked assault. Behind him, Denise sat frozen in her chair, finally understanding that she had just made a catastrophic error in judgment on live television. "Michael, wait," she called after him, but her voice was weak, desperate. The damage was done, and everyone knew it. Michael paused at the studio door, turned back one final time, and delivered his parting words with the quiet authority that had made him a legend. "Denise, I genuinely hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, but you won't find it by trying to destroy other people's reputations. Good luck with the rest of your show." The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like thunder in the deadly silent studio. Denise sat alone with her triumph, which had turned to ashes in her mouth. finally understanding that she had just committed professional suicide on national television. While the cameras rolled and the world watched,